welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by an author who I actually first heard of as an editor. I have interviewed many of the authors edited or rather released by Tenebrous Press, and I am so excited to finally get to read a book by this person. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Hi, I'm Alex Woodroe, and yes, I'm the editor-in-chief of Tenebrous Press, and I'm also a writer. And this book is called The Night Ship. It's my second book through Flame Tree Press, and it is kind of a cosmic horror slash post-apocalyptic uh, combination of weird things, I think. I like to call it my It's Complicated book.
It certainly is complicated. Wow, it is such a great story. I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your journey toward writing. In particular, I'm curious, did you come to editing or writing first?
Well, it's complicated. I didn't write fiction until very late. I've done a gazillion different kinds of jobs. And I kind of circled fiction because I was a translator and interpreter for a while. Then I skipped to tending bar and making good tips because money needed to be made. At some point after I left the country, I lived in Italy for a while and I was writing at that point, but I was writing like web content, reviews, and things like that to pay the bills. And at that point, I kind of already thought of myself as a writer, even though I had never written a word of fiction. And it was only about, I think, I think this is like my 6 year anniversary, close to my 6 year anniversary of writing fiction and being in fiction publishing, that I started writing fiction because I saw a contest online and I sent them a little drabble and I got published for the first time. And it just kind of spiraled out of control from there. And the editing journey is more or less the same because I used to do editing, freelance for nonfiction long before I started editing fiction. So everything kind of meshed together at the same time, I want to say. But yeah, it's only been 5 or 6 years for me.
Oh, nice. Yeah, as I was saying, I'm a huge fan of the press. We've interviewed JC Morris here, Joshua Hull, the authors of Post Haste Manor, so many others. You're just publishing so much cool stuff. I'm sure the answer is, yes and or it's complicated. But how does your experience as an editor influence your writing and vice versa? Do you feel like they shape each other?
Oh, they definitely do. Not necessarily in the way that people expect, because I feel like a lot of people think that if you're an editor, that means that you can apply those skills to your own writing, and you categorically cannot. That is kind of like being your own therapist, It absolutely doesn't work. You can try, but it's not going to happen. However, being in publishing as an editor, reading all the manuscripts that people send us, because we select our manuscripts through open submissions, we select short stories through open submissions, which means that I have to read a lot of wonderful work that's unpublished. So I get to read basically the most cutting edge stuff that's out there. And unfortunately, I have to say no to a lot of it. And after you do that for a while, it kind of it strips away a lot of your own ego about your writing because, I don't have feelings anymore. If I send stuff out and it gets rejected, I don't translate it as meaning anything about me or my writing. I'm well aware of exactly what the statistics are like out there. And it kind of does give you more of a perspective over how difficult it is to just write anything at all, let alone get it published, and how every single time somebody succeeds in any way, that's huge. Like that is a big accomplishment worth celebrating. And yeah, in that way, it helps me significantly. I think before I was editing properly for a press, when I was just doing freelance, and I was getting those first rejections, I definitely took it a lot harder. I quit writing like 4 different times. I love telling people that because I want them to know that if they like quit art in general, that's okay. It happens to everybody. It's probably not permanent. You don't actually get a choice.
Wow, that is such an interesting observation. I never, you always hear as sort of a comforting phrase, like it has nothing to do with your writing. There's just so many people out there and it's about luck and fit and all these other things. But you have hard proof of that
Yeah, yeah.
that a
Which
lot
is
of
why
authors.
I really recommend that people volunteer to help out with presses when they're doing open submissions. For one thing, because people need the help, but for another, because it really helps you see what it means. And you being the one who has to say, no, this story, I love this story so much, but it cannot physically fit, then you kind of understand it in a whole different way.
Wow. So I'd love to know about the inception of this book. Was it the time period? Was it a character? Was it a particular spooky vibe? What was the seed from which this germinated?
I think it was the radio. It was the
Mhm.
radio transmissions because one of my long-standing obsessions in fiction is Pontypool, which obviously uses the radio to such amazing effect to tell you things that are happening beyond what you can immediately see in front of you. And I loved that so much. And just driving around here in the countryside because we are like live from Transylvania right now. So just driving around here in the countryside, especially at night, the radio towers look magnificent.
Mm.
It's just this bright red light somewhere off in the distance. I always found them so impressive. And it kind of, because it's a hillsy area and you can see a long distance away and you can see headlights and the radio towers, it does sometimes feel like you're just sailing through nothing at all. And the only thing guiding you are these lights in the distance. So yeah, I think that's definitely where it started from, that kind of idea.
It is such a creepy vibe, and I've often felt that way while driving at night on long drives, that you are the only person out there. You could be alone
Hmm.
for hundreds of thousands of
Hmm.
miles for all you know. It is a very solitary feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Or on the other hand, the opposite. There could be anything happening out there. You
mm,
could be driving past any moment of somebody's life. You could be driving past something absolutely unbelievable and you wouldn't even know it. It's just happening out there.
yes, which is so much more terrifying. And I'm a huge fan of Pontypool, and I really love big stories that take place in
Mhm.
small spaces like that. It's it's also like in terms of movie production, such a smart way to tell a really high concept story, but within like a constrained budget, like
Yeah,
hint.
it's my favorite thing. Honestly, it's my favorite thing. I get so excited whenever I read a movie description. I'm like, and they're trapped inside an elevator for the entire movie. Yes. And they're just sat in this living room having a conversation for the entire movie. Yes. And like, yes, I love that stuff.
It is, and it's so scary for all of that. So you've set this story in Romania in the 1980s,
Mhm.
and I would love to know about how that context informs, and here's where I'm going to keep the question broad,
Mhm.
informs the horror. Because something, mysterious and apocalyptic vaguely happens.
Mhm.
Um, how does that historical, political, social context shape your depiction of the supernatural here?
I think it does in so many ways, and I think so many of them were instinctual. I wasn't even necessarily planning it, but because I am myself a product of the dictatorship, I was born immediately after the revolution. And so, a lot like the characters in the book, I was dealing with the aftermath of it being gone. And processing something like that, people think it's over and that means it's over. Processing something like that takes generations. It is not over right now still. So a lot like those characters, I was processing what had happened and was just suddenly over unexpectedly. I was raised with all of that information and all of those stories and all of that trauma, and by a generation of people who are heavily traumatized by what happened. And so, of course, even just by instinct, a lot of what ended up in the book, afterwards, I realized how much more connected it was. Because if we're talking about this horror at the core of the story, even without revealing too much, the point, like in many horrors, is that there is something in the deep. There is something there. There's definitely something there. We definitely feel the effects of it up top. We don't know exactly what it is, and yet we still have to deal with it anyway, right? And that is kind of the core of living through political tribulations in general, the core of how people live through dictatorship, and the core of the stories that they tell about it. Fundamentally, they never knew exactly what was going on. They never knew exactly what the next day would bring. They never knew exactly who was pulling which strings and which direction things would go. They just had to keep going on with their lives anyway, even in a context where it was uncertain whether there would be food the next day, even when for many people in many places the answer was no. And like they still had to carry on, and life still had to carry on, and they still had to make it work. And a lot of times that implied doing illegal and dangerous things, a lot of smuggling. Like I have my own family stories about that, but everybody has the same stories. It's not like my smugglers were special, everybody was doing it. And I mean, imagine how ubiquitous the smuggling was. When I was a teenager, I started noticing that every time we went to the doctor, my grandmother would bring um, these baggies of coffee and oranges and chocolates. And I didn't totally understand why at first, because when I was a teenager, those things were around. Like you could get those things. This was like 15 years post-revolution. But it was so ingrained in them that those things had high value, that to them, taking that stuff to the doctor was a way of bribing the doctor to pay more attention to you, which again was a thing that wasn't technically necessary anymore, because at that point the doctors were paying attention to everybody. But 15 years later, you couldn't get that out of their system. And I have a friend who is a nurse right now, and she still has a cupboard in her house that is full of coffee and cigarettes and chocolates and jars of jam that people bring her, because 35 years later, it's still ingrained into them. And that's what I mean about how long it takes to process the effects of something like that. Like we still give oranges at Christmas as the most high value gift there is, and it's been 35 years. You can buy oranges any day, you know? And so definitely I feel like a lot of the ways that those characters are feeling, just floating through the dark, trying to figure out what's what, trying to figure out whether the illegal stuff that they did is going to get them into trouble, or there's worse trouble coming from elsewhere. And usually the answer is both. And just not knowing what tomorrow is going to bring. Yeah, I feel like that's basically historical fiction,
Mm.
practically at this point for me.
Wow. That is an absolutely fascinating observation, and it makes me wonder how many cultural traditions, practices, rituals are trauma responses, you know? Yeah.
We don't even realize until you really start questioning things.
Yeah.
The reason that I'm here and talking to you right now, the reason why I speak English, the reason why I speak English well enough to write in English, and I don't speak Romanian well enough to write in Romanian, ironically, is a trauma response. It is because the moment that the revolution happened, my parents, like many other people, suddenly had this access to this English speaking world that was completely off limits before. And as a reaction to how banned all of it was, they decided, okay, this kid is going to go to a bilingual kindergarten, and all of the cartoons are all the Disney is going to be in English, and it's just going to be English all the way to the end. I don't even think they knew why they were doing that. They certainly didn't have any plans for me to work in this field, but it was just a reaction of what had just happened. So
Mm.
where my sister, who is 8 years older, she got to have childhood in communist dictatorship, and she got to go to technical schools and pretty much the hardest schools in town. I went to the fun-loving bilingual English-speaking school and I studied comparative literature. And even that is just a trauma response in the end.
Wow. My gosh. And I'm really interested also in how that um, influences or shapes the dynamic between our three main characters. I'd love to start with Rosie. She's so fascinating. I love her sort of abrasive truth telling. Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about her and her relationships with the people that she's stuck in this situation with?
I think she's a little bit modeled after my grandmother. My grandmother is who I was primarily hearing these stories from. My grandfather was a truck driver, often a logging truck driver, and they were often driving together through the mountains to make deliveries. She would be on his trips for company, really. And a lot of the stories I got were from her. So Rosie is very much modeled on her. She was a very competent woman always. She was a very opinionated woman, but you could tell she was keeping most of her opinions internal. But like once she actually got to saying something, you knew it was bad if even she's going to tell you. Um, and so I think Rosie is kind of the key to everything. I don't think any of the story could have happened or any of the survivors would have survived without her. And I tried very much at the same time to not make her a superhero of any sort. Like she is a very normal person who is also very troubled in her own way, struggling with her own past, like everybody is. Right? At least I think everybody, I hope everybody is. Like,
I hope
you know, I hope we're all introspective about things, but you never know, do you?
too.
Um, but yeah, they are definitely modeled on real people. And I think her relationship with everybody around her is one of distrust, which is natural when you don't really know which side anybody's on or what anybody's thinking in that situation. Obviously, there's also some not knowing, before the apocalypse happened, were they working for the government? Because again, that doesn't just end all of a sudden. So if they were, they still would be. And then on the other hand, it's also one of openness, I think, or at least I hope she comes across that way. I see her as somebody who does want to have friendships, who does want to make connections, who does want the world to be a better place. It's just that there's a lot of impediments in the way, that's all.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like she particularly enjoys keeping secrets from people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You
And
just do what you have to do,
yes,
obviously.
yeah. And, there's something so interesting about the parallels between um, of the three of them who are stuck in this truck. She's not only the only one who is able to be honest about the political situation that they're in, but also about the apocalyptic situation that they're in. And so often, truth telling is presented as an impediment in stories, like somebody's too bold,
Mm-hmm.
somebody is too brash. But here it helps her survive, like both things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's very much me self-inserting to some extent into the text, whether I want to or not. But I say that to all the authors. You're putting your heart in that text anyway, whether you think you are or not, you're still doing it all the time. Because I do see in in publishing and in the world in general, I think, especially women who are very honest, especially women who have that tendency to be truth-telling, who tend to be very observant, who tend to be very direct. It is often seen as a negative quality. It is often something that holds you back. It is often something that's perceived as being bossy or aggressive or just annoying or any number of things. Difficult, right? That's the word I'm looking for. It is often perceived as difficult, when in reality, the only person experiencing any difficulty is the one who is like that. Because usually they're coming from a place of best possible intentions, and then the consequences are almost 100% on them for being honest to begin with. I've always had kind of a struggle with that. I'm not going to pretend like I'm some paragon of honesty or anything like that, but I've had a struggle with the fact that it does feel like society expects a little bit more covertness from you than I'm personally capable of doing.
Mm.
It's not even that I'm a better person than anybody else. I definitely am not. I just don't have the capacity. I don't have the ability that I see other people have. I couldn't. And so I think struggling with that is probably why I end up. She's not the only character, and she's not going to be the last character for sure. I already know what's happening in the next book, so like definitely not the last one who's like that. I think I kind of vent a little bit of my frustration with that aspect in books. Yeah.
Mm. Well, to circle back to the radio,
Hmm.
each chapter has an epigraph that is a transmission. I love them. They range from funny to heartbreaking, and some of them almost read like poetry. So a two-part question is, one, were they as fun to write as I imagine they were? And two, where in the writing process did they come? Did you come up with them after you sort of saw where a chapter was going? Were they a last thing, a first thing? What was that like?
They were incredibly fun to write, and they usually came as I was writing the book. Some of them maybe got moved in a different order,
Mm.
but yeah, they usually came as I was writing because they functioned as a break for me. You know, as I was writing, a lot of times it was a lot of really heavy stuff. It was a lot of either a lot of limbs to keep track of in the dark or a lot of heavy emotional stuff. And every now and then I got to take a break and think, okay, yes, it's happening here, but it doesn't have to be connected to this specific moment or this specific plot in any way. I can just send out any message that I want. What do I feel like doing? And it was usually such a breath of relief to be able to focus on that for 10 minutes, 15 minutes and do something different. And so the outcome ranges from retold Romanian jokes. There's a Romanian song reinterpreted in there at one point, kind of urban legend stuff about the national lottery, grocery lists. There's a dog, there's a joke about a boat. It's just, it was so refreshing and important for me to be able to pause and do that. Probably going to keep that practice up, even with things that are not necessarily going to end up included in the books because it was such a refreshment for me.
Mm. I did love the wide range of them and the way that they sort of hinted at, all these different ways that people were weathering or surviving or
Mm.
expressing themselves like in this situation. And very life affirming, like it seems like it could be very silly to tell like a sort of, silly joke when in what might be your last message, but that's also very life affirming and like I was here, it's like a sort of triumphant
Absolutely.
graffiti in the air.
Absolutely, it is. And it is a whole range. If you think about it, nobody's going to interpret anything in their life in the same way, let alone a big event like that one. So I had a lot of fun writing, for example, the two officers who are talking to each other and absolutely refusing to admit that refusing to be the first one to admit that anything is happening. And I was like thinking about it and thinking, I know these people. I know exactly who would be having this conversation in real life if this happened.
Oh, it is such a wonderful book, and I'm so glad I got to talk to you about it. You hinted at the next book. Is there anything that you're able to say about that, or is it all
Oh
under wraps
yes. So
still?
the next one is actually already announced.
Mm.
Because it's coming out this October. It's coming through a different publisher, through Clash, because it is a novella this time. And you're going to be really shocked to hear this. It is an enclosed setting with a plucky female protagonist.
Yes.
It is kind of post-apocalyptic-y, cosmic-y weird. And it's the story of a researcher who walks into an ancient abandoned Romanian manor, which is based on a real building that I've seen and I was absolutely obsessed by. And her job is to find out why the entire planet has basically gone insane. There are signals coming from inside the gardens of that one specific manor, And as she enters that house, the doors close shut behind her and she is locked in for the duration of the story. So yeah, that is coming out this October through Clash. It's called Tatratea, but there's going to be more info about that everywhere,
Oh,
hopefully.
amazing. That sounds fantastic. I look forward to that. All right. Well, listeners, you know what your homework is. Please check out The Night Ship. It's available now. It'll be available as you hear this. So head to your favorite bookstore, library, website, perhaps, and check out Tenebrous Press. There's so much good stuff for you to read there. I'll drop that link in the comments too. All right. Thank you all for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.